am reviewing. I am recording as well. So let's take a look at the handout. We're recording, we're going over the review together. And I'm sure because I know that you guys are so smart that you're going to be able to help me fill this out together. So first of all, I want to go over some basics of Judaism. You might remember Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. And they believe in God. They believe that the one God made a covenant or a promise with the Jews, that there's this promise, this covenant that, hey, if we keep the Ten Commandments and the other associated laws, God will bless them. If they don't keep the Ten Commandments and other laws, God will not. That is called a covenant, or on the first blank, a promise with the Jews. And on the second line, Jews argued that they were his, you'll write down, chosen people. They believed that even though God made all people and God in some way loves all people, there's a special way the Jews felt and argued that they were his chosen people. And they would argue who else had prophets with books. It was the Jews who did, and they felt that for them, this was evidence that they were his chosen people. But even though they were his chosen people, and they had a promised land, like Israel was their promised land. It was like their homeland. You might remember the Moses story. He led them from Egypt to a promised land. They didn't stay in the promised land. In fact, you might recall they were actually kicked out of their holy land. And there's a word for the fact that Jews were kicked out and dispersed all throughout the world. That is called the diaspora. If you don't know how to spell that, that's DIASPORA, the diaspora. And this is why we have Jews in Germany, Jews throughout North Africa, Jews in... What's that? There are Jews in Germany still, all throughout Europe. This is called the diaspora, dispersal of the Jewish people. Below that, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all of them are monotheistic, right? Monotheistic means they believe in how many gods? Just one. And if you believe in a monotheistic God, there's a couple characteristics that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all agree on. All agree that this one invisible God is omnipotent, which means he is all... No. All powerful. Omnipotent means you are all powerful. And Jews, Christians, and Muslims all agree that this all-powerful, invisible God is also omnipresent, which means he is everywhere. Jews, Christians, and Muslims also agree this invisible one God is also omnibenevolent, which means he is all good or all loving, either one. And finally, Jews, Christians, and Muslims would argue that their one invisible God is also omniscient, which means he is all-knowing. So he's omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient. He is all of these things. And Jews, Christians, and Muslims also share actually some common characters in their holy books. For example, all three agree that all of us in this room come from this one man originally. Who is that? Adam. So write down common figures like Adam. And we can also add Moses as well, because all three agree Moses was an important dude. Now, you'll notice I said they share figures like Moses and Adam, but Jews, what do Jews believe about Jesus today? He's not the Messiah. He's just a guy, and actually he is probably a deceiver or mentally ill. I mean, this guy said he was the son of God, and if like someone in your class said he was the son of God, you'd probably like, okay, that guy needs to get checked out. So Jews don't believe Jesus was actually anyone important at all. Christianity and Islam have a lot of similarities because they do both respect Moses and Jesus. Jesus is mentioned in the Quran more than Muhammad is mentioned. Actually, the Quran says a lot of things about Jesus. The Quran tells us Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. The Quran tells us that Jesus performed miracles. The Quran tells us that Jesus ascended to heaven. And actually, the Quran tells us Jesus is coming back at the end of the world. But there's two things Jesus definitely are different than the Bible. For example, in the Quran, Jesus did not do what for you? He did not die on a cross for you. And Jesus most certainly is not this in the Quran. He's definitely not the Son of God. So they do have a lot of respect for Moses and Jesus, but there are some important differences between the the Jesus of the Quran and the Jesus of the New Testament. Other things that are similar with Christianity and Islam, they both were, you'll write down, multi-ethnic. You can see white, black, and brown Christians and Muslims. There is no one official ethnic group to be a Muslim. There's no one official ethnic group to be a Christian. They're multi-ethnic. And the third line, they are also, I'll say then spell it, they were egalitarian. Egalitarian is spelled Egalitarian. So egalitarian speaks of like pressing for equality, and there's no caste system in Islam. There's no caste system in Christianity. It's for the rich, but it's also for the poor. But also there is a sense that for genders, there's actual some egalitarianism. I'll give you two examples for gender and egalitarianism for Christianity and then for Islam. In Christianity, you might remember there's a story that I may have shared with you that one time Jesus was teaching and there was two women who showed up, Mary and Martha was cooking and Martha was cleaning, but Mary was not. And because of that, Martha was super pissed off at Mary, and Martha said, Jesus, tell Mary to go in the kitchen with me. And Jesus said, well, what did he say in response to that question? This was on a homework assignment we did. I gave you quotes from the New Testament stories, and you copied and pasted from your friend. So in that story, Mary and Martha are there. Martha's doing all the housework, traditional women's stuff, and Mary is actually sitting and listening to Jesus the teacher. This was very unusual because women never really actually sat in for teaching. Women were not educated like that. And Jesus actually said, I'm not going to force her to go cook and clean. What she's doing is a good thing. And this was odd that Jesus was actually accepting female students. It's unusual. And there's another example of positive role for women in the New Testament. According to the New Testament, who were the first people who saw Jesus rise from the dead? Women. And what did the men do when things were on the line, when people were wondering, are you a follower of Jesus? They ran and hid. And so there's this juxtaposition. The women are brave. The women are believers. The women see Jesus rise from the dead. And the men, they run and hide. That's kind of interesting. What about in the Quran? Now, sometimes with the Quran, people get the vibe that it doesn't speak well of women, but I think in many ways it does. Now, of course, there's some things that may make us uncomfortable. You might recall we read a passage from the Quran that said, if there's a woman whom you fear rebellion, what is the advice the Quran gives you? To do what to her? It says to beat her, but to beat her lightly. There's the idea that you're not allowed to bruise your wife, and the idea you're not allowed to break her bones. But there's some way that it's okay for the husband to have some sort of discipline of the wife. That being said, that can be stuff that we feel uncomfortable with. But there's one thing for sure Muhammad did that elevated the rights of women. And I'll give you an example. Before Islam, there's this period of ignorance. In Arabic, there's this word called Jahiliyyah, which is the age of ignorance. And actually, if you had a baby girl, people thought, oh, that's such a bummer, because you feed this baby girl and you dress her and you do all this stuff. And you know what she does when she gets older? She gets married and she leaves your family. And there's no more benefits. So you just basically put all this money into this kid who leaves you. That's not good. And so sadly, in Arabia, before Islam, if you had a baby girl and you're like, we can't afford this, you take the baby and you just like leave the baby in the desert. But that's fine because there's like jackals and vultures and they'll take care of the baby girl that you don't want. And this was actually super common. They would leave baby girls out in the desert. Well, Muhammad said, we can't do that anymore. That's actually morally wrong to kill baby girls. And because of Muhammad, he put an end to the sacrificing of baby girls in the desert. That's something that Muhammad did, and it changed the Arabian Peninsula forever. This is an example of egalitarianism in Islam. So both Christianity and Islam put some sense of worth and dignity in women, and in some ways elevate them. So they're both egalitarian. They also, we'll write down, were missionary religions. Missionary religions, and in different ways, because Christianity for sure wants to convert you. Now, Islam is okay converting you. In fact, there are people who do try to get in conversations with Christians and convert Christians, but there's a little bit less of a focus in Islam, because if I'm a Jew and if I'm a Christian, what do I have to do to keep my freedom of religion in a Muslim-controlled government? I have to pay what? Pay a tax. There's a freedom of religion tax. So Islam is fine with you converting, but also if you don't, that's fine also, because it's money in my pocket. But I think you could still say they were missionary religions. Going now to China. What is it called in China that this thing was seen as a sign of divine approval that my dynasty has what it takes to lead and to rule? Write down the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven was seen as divine approval of a dynasty. And you might remember the word dynasty just means a family in charge. The word dynasty means the one family going father, son, or male relative of the same family. And whenever you run out of dudes, or whenever there's a violent overthrow, then the dynasty changed. And you might remember there's something called a dynastic cycle, where things start out great, and then they make some improvements, but the dynasty gets old, the dynasty gets corrupt, people get tired of the corruption, and guess what people do when they're tired of a corrupt government? They overthrow. There's a rebellion. So we're going to write down the dynastic cycle come to an end with the loss of this approval. If you don't have the approval of the mandate of heaven, your dynasty's done. The dynastic cycle will come to an end with the loss of this approval. If you don't have the mandate of heaven, you're not going to rule China. We'll write down on the next line that rebellion was a way to reveal who had the new mandate. If I rebel against the government and it fails, I guess you still had the mandate, my bad. And if I rebel against the government and I succeed, I guess you lost the mandate of heaven, and I guess we got it. So rebellion was a way to reveal who had the new mandate. And even though China would change dynasties, like, for example, we talked about there was like a Han dynasty at one point and it fell apart. And later there was a Tang dynasty and then they fell apart. Who came after the Tang? The Song did, right? In China, when one dynasty falls, after a certain intermediate period, there's a new dynasty. And there's always just one dynasty, though. What I mean by that is, I want to compare this with Europe real quick. What was that one empire that unified most of Europe? The Roman Empire, right? And the Roman Empire didn't last forever, but it did during its time unify most of Europe. But when the Roman Empire fell apart, well, how many countries are in Europe today? There's a lot, right? Like easily say, over a dozen, there's a lot of countries. There's Portugal and Spain and Italy, there's France and Netherlands, there's Belgium, there's Denmark, there's Germany, there's England, there's like a lot. There was just one, the Roman Empire, and now there's like dozens. But what about China? Like, how many countries speak Chinese? Like China does, right? Like, there's not multiple Chinas. There's not like 24 Chinas. There's just one. And this is a general pattern and contrast with Europe. It says on the handout that though China would change dynasties, they would generally remain one, you'll write down, centralized government. They would generally remain one centralized government. And that's like a difference between Europe. Europe had one government, the Roman Empire. It fell, and then Europe fragmented, like a piece of glass dropped on the floor, and it could never really come back together again. But China, whenever a dynasty fell, there would just be another empire, another dynasty that would take over. The borders would be a little different, but it would always come back together again in some form or some fashion. China, it says on your handout, would not, please write down, politically fragment. It would not politically fragment. To fragment means to break. To fragment means to shatter, and China would not do that. Ethnocentricity. China saw themselves as this. What was their name for themselves? The Middle Kingdom, right? They thought we are the best. We're the most important. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you don't speak Chinese, you're pretty much just a barbarian, right? And it says because of this view, They had a very robust government, and generally we see a centralized Chinese dynasty help to strengthen, expand, and maintain international, please write down, trade routes. International trade routes. And actually, you know the name of one of the most famous trade routes in and from China. It was best known as the Silk Road. Exactly. Best known as the Silk Road. As the Silk Road. And if you're hanging out with the neighbors, you're hanging out with the people around you, you find out that they got some cool stuff that you don't have. And then you want to bring that stuff in. Well, to China's south, there's a country, and this country to China's south has some pretty cool stuff. And China wants to take that stuff from this country to their south. And it turns out that they had a very high yield grain. And what I mean by that is that there was a type of rice that they grew to the south of China, that this rice was actually incredible, that you would plant it and you got twice the amount of rice as the native types of rice in China. Because even if you go to the store today, there's dozens of types of rice. Not all rice is the same. You have jasmine rice, basmati rice. You have all these different colors and variations and tastes of rice. And this one rice they got from the south was the best rice ever. We'll write down on the handout that they got a high yield grain from, what is that country south of China called? Vietnam. Write down Vietnam. They got a high yield grain from Vietnam. And there's a name for this rice that became super famous. This rice was known as, please write down, champa rice, and I'll spell that if that's weird. That's CHAMPA, champa rice. That's what it was called. And this rice was incredible because you got so much more out of it for the exact same amount of work. And so if there's more food available, what's going to happen to the Song's population? It's going to grow, right? Because you have all this food for the kids. And I'm not worried about, we don't have it. Actually, we have a ridiculous amount. Don't even worry about it. We have so much food. China's population, actually, we can track it, began to skyrocket, actually. And who does all the farming in China? Well, peasants for sure do. And it says peasants would work the land, but we don't really see slave labor in the farmers. We don't really see slaves doing it. In American mass agriculture, for sure, sadly, we have slave labor in the American economy in the 1800s. We don't really see that in China. There are poor people working the land, but we don't really see slaves working the rice fields in China. It's just not what we see. Below that, neighboring nations. So neighboring nations entered into a subordinate relationship with China, and I made a reference to Hunger Games regarding this particular term. You might remember in Hunger Games, there's these districts, and they are subordinate to the capital. And because of this, they send two per district, two of these to the capital every year in Hunger Games. What do they send? Two. Right. So what do we call this system where countries surrounding China say, China, you're better than us. You are awesome. And we are in submission to you. What is this system called? Close, or some of you got it. It's called the tributary system. If you don't know how to spell that, this subordinate relationship with them is called the tributary system. That's TRIBUTARY, the tributary system. And generally, we say there's three countries that are part of this tributary system. And in these three, China spread their cultural values. What are those three? Korea, Vietnam, and one more, and Japan. So there are three countries that China super influenced. That would be Korea, that would be Vietnam, and that would be Japan. And this influence is in many different areas, but it includes the spread of this philosophy, the Chinese of Chinese philosophies. What is the most Chinese philosophy? It includes Confucianism. This included the spread of, please write down, Confucianism. So we see Confucianism in Korea, we see it in Vietnam, and we see it to some degree in Japan as well. And Confucianism has a lot to say about it, but it includes a concept we call the three submissions. That's SUB Missions. And you remember the three submissions? It says that right now, as a high school girl, every girl should be submitted or listening and obeying who in her life? The father. And then when you get married, every girl will then submit, listen, and honor her. And then her husband's going to die. And at that point, she's going to listen and honor and submit to her sons. And this can come off seeming bad, but it's not meant to. It's meant to be good. It's meant to let every woman know that you will be protected and be provided for. That you will never have to wonder who's going to protect me and who's going to. You won't ever have that question. There's always going to be a man whose job is to protect and provide for you. And this is supposed to be a safety mechanism. It's supposed to make you feel not subjugated, but free to know that you don't have to worry about these things. It's called the three submissions. And because everyone has there's a people in charge in a very structured way, we'll say there's a very clear social, what is the word for this ladder of authority? Hierarchy. If you don't know how to spell hierarchy, social hierarchy, that's HIERARCHY. HIERARCHY. Confucianism for sure has a strict hierarchy. We also see a stress in Confucianism on something called filial piety, which is like honoring your parents / elders. In fact, what's one of the best things you can do to show filial piety for your mom and dad? You can have kids, because you can worship them, and you should. But listen, unless you produce children, who's going to honor and worship your parents when you're gone? So filial piety is honoring your parents / ancestors or / elders. And one of the best ways you can show them respect is by having babies. Confucianism also stresses loyalty to the quote-unquote father of China. Who's the father of China? The emperor is. Man, a lot of good knowledge we have here. Let's flip to the backside. On the backside, everyone has a duty and role to play. Everyone has a duty and role to play. And there's actually problems if you don't do your duty. In fact, what happens to all of China if you don't do your duty? Yeah, China gets corrupt, and actually the whole system breaks down. So you disobeying your husband, you not honoring your father, actually has way bigger consequences than you could ever imagine. And a good term to describe not just China, but every civilization we've ever studied is this word. It's patriarchy, which is what kind of society? Male dominated. For good or for evil, all societies, all civilizations rather, are patriarchal. There's never been a civilization that has been matriarchal. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying you'll never find a civilization that is woman dominated. In this society, in China, the dream job for my boy, man, I'd love my boy to get a job in the bureaucracy. If you work in the bureaucracy, you're working for the government, but because so many people wanted that job, they had something that you'd have to do to get that job. Employment in the bureaucracy was based on the civil service exam. The civil service exam. And this exam, you probably recall, you had to memorize the Confucian classics. And it was kind of cool, though, because it was actually technically open to anyone. But what practical skill do you need to have to be able to take this test? Which is fine until you realize 90% of the population can't read and write. Because if I'm a farmer, I don't have time for my son to be memorizing characters. I've got chunk of rice in the field that needs to be harvested. So my son can't read. And so that's why we're going to say it provided limited opportunities to those who could do what again? Who could read and write. Now, if you can read and write, and you can memorize the Confucian classics, and if you pass that test, which is ridiculously hard to pass, by working for the bureaucracy, the government, there was a chance for, we'll write down, social advancement. Social advancement. What I mean by social advancement is that it's possible that you would do better than your parents. And they want you to do better than your parents. There's another word for this. Sometimes we use the word meritocracy. That, a democracy is run by the people. Meritocracy is a society run by people who have merit. Like we have the National Merit Scholar is someone who does really good in the SAT test. Well, are only white people allowed to take the SAT? No, theoretically, it's open to anyone. And we have high performers of Chinese Americans, on Indian Americans. We have all kinds of different groups who do well on the SAT. Theoretically, it's an example of meritocracy, that if you have merit, you can do well. And that was the idea here in China. By working for the bureaucracy, there was a chance for social advancement. In fact, Confucianism was the official philosophy of China. It was the official philosophy / religion, even, of China. And I say philosophy / religion because there's no God in Confucianism, but there's a lot of religious-y stuff in Confucianism. So it's the official philosophy / religion of China. It's Confucianism. But if you're the official one, that means you're not going to like the non-official ones. And in fact, we have something called Neo-Confucianism, which would see this as a threat, their mortal enemy, their rival, Buddhism. This would Neo-Confucianism would see this as a threat. You'll write down Buddhism. They didn't dislike it. They hated Buddhism. They couldn't stand Buddhism. You might remember they actually closed down Buddhist monasteries and burned Buddhist books. It was pretty intense. And there's a couple reasons why they hated Buddhism. One reason was that women in Buddhism didn't have to do this. They didn't have to get married. And not only was that okay, it was almost recommended. And that is crazy. What are these women doing? I mean, who are they going to serve if they're not providing for a husband? In fact, what freaked out these Neo-Confucianists is that women by the thousands were joining what in China? Monasteries. If you don't know how to spell that, that's Monasteries. Women were joining monasteries. So they're not getting married. They're making these independent decisions. It's very, very unsettling. And to make it worse, some women actually even claim to be bodhisattvas, which are basically, you can write down living saints. You might remember a living saint is what you write down. A bodhisattva is a person who's so holy, so amazing, they could actually experience nirvana, but they actually choose to stay behind and be a teacher. And you're we don't deserve, we don't need, we can't believe this person would stay behind, but they are, because they're trying to just stay behind to help us. So that's that. Now, there's also a physical symbol we see them practicing, a physical symbol of Neo-Confucianism that has to deal with women and reestablishing women's role. What is this disturbing physical practice they did to women? Foot binding. You might remember from a young age, we break and bind a girl's feet, and it's terrible, and it hurts. And a couple of things about foot binding is that you can't really work in a meaningful way. You can't work on your feet. And if I have a wife whose feet are bound, it says, man, you must be a rich man, because you can actually afford a wife who can't do anything physically. So it's a status symbol. But moreover, when my wife gets older, she can't really balance well with those kind of feet. And so she'll need a husband or son to actually stabilize her. And that's cool from a Neo-Confucian point of view, because it's a physical reminder of what we all know to be true in Neo-Confucianism, that women are dependent on who? On men. So it's for them, this is a good reminder. Another major Chinese philosophy was what? There's really just two major ones. Taoism, right? And there's two ways you can spell it, but we can spell it Daoism, Taoism. And Taoism emphasized peace with, you'll write down, nature. You might remember the big example was like a river. In which direction does water flow?
Down.
Down. It doesn't ever try to like go up straight, like this is like, I'm going to go uphill. Like, and for all of us, we shouldn't try to fight and change. We need to actually just find out who we authentically were meant to be and just go with that. Because whenever we try to change things, we actually just ruin it and we don't make things better. We actually often make things worse. The Song Dynasty generated enough wealth to improve, you'll write down, two things: the Great Wall and the Grand Canal. You might remember that there's two rivers in China, but those two rivers in China only flow west to east, and there was no north to south traffic, and they thought, you know what, we're going to build a canal, and it's going to be so grand, we're going to call it the Grand Canal. And it was an amazing engineering accomplishment. The Great Wall and the Grand Canal. But the Song Dynasty also have new technology that helps increase farm production. So they're putting out more crops than they ever had before. And it's not just farm production that increases. It's not just farm production that new technology helps increase, but also it says China became the world leader in iron production, and you'll write down manufacturing. Manufacturing means like making physical stuff. And they made a lot of physical stuff. So let's move away from China and let's go to Christianity. So Christianity by itself, no longer comparing clearly, but it's spread. If you put your game away, it would be easier, Mr. Carr. Thank you. So instead of looking at your neighbor every 30 seconds, just don't play a game and you'll see the progress. So Christianity spread as far east as India and China. In fact, if you go to India today, if you meet a Christian from India, there's a good chance they come from the southwestern part of India. I met a gentleman just a few weeks ago, and he's from India, and he's a Christian. And I asked him, I said, "Oh, are you from the Southwest?" And he said, "Yes, he is." And I said, "Are you a Thomas Christian?" And he says, "Yes, I am." Because Indians, if you ask them, they believe that the first Christian that came to India was the Apostle Thomas. And so Indian Christians are often called Thomas Christians. And he said, "I'm a Thomas Christian." And for him, he said, "My family's been Christian for 2,000 years." That those Indians in Southwest India, they believe that they can trace their family all the way back to the Apostle Thomas coming over. And if you and I go to a church service of a Thomas Christian, their services are still done in Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke. And actually in Houston, Texas, there's 3 Thomas Christian churches. There's one in Pearland where you and I can go. Everyone is Indian, and their service is not in English, but it is in this Syriac/Aramaic related to the language of Jesus. There's 3 of those churches right here in Houston, Texas. So very multi-ethnic, as we mentioned earlier. We also see, sadly for Christianity in China, that the Christian presence in China would come to an end due to Neo-Confucianism. You know, Neo-Confucianism hates all things not Chinese. Neo-Confucianism hated Buddhism, but they also hate Christianity too, because Christianity is not from China. Below that, Mongols and Christianity, and my typo. My apologies. I wrote this last night as the Astros were being destroyed by the Atlanta Braves, and I messed up and I never came back. Where it says Mongols and Christianity, we'll write down Mongol women converted. There were actually a lot of Mongol women who converted to Christianity. We'll talk more specifics about them when we get to the Mongols on their own. Mongol women converted, all you need to know for that. And it wouldn't be lasting in its influence because it says on the handout, Mongols would later widely embrace Islam. And that would have a lasting impact. Mongols would later widely embrace Islam. There's a country on the handout called Armenia. Armenia is close to Iran and Iraq, and its most famous people from there weren't born there, These are, sadly, social influencers that have no discernible talent. There's many of them. What family is this?
Kim Kardashian.
Okay, so I like how quickly we identified, like, no discernible talent, but a billionaire? I think her and her sister are both individually billionaires, which is crazy. But you could not, like, identify a clear talent that they have. Like, you can't say, oh, they're beautiful. That's not like a talent. They don't have any discernible talent other than marketing themselves. Maybe that's their talent, is they're pushing their brand. But the Kardashians are Armenian, and this is this country, their fathers from Armenia. This is like near Iran and near Iraq, and Armenia is famous for becoming the first, we'll write down, Christian nation. It was the first country on the planet that said, for us, Christianity is the official religion. This Far East European / Central Asian country, not a European proper country, becomes officially Christian, but Armenia, which is near Iran and Iraq, is the first one in the world. And they still are super into their Christianity to this day. I think when Kim goes to church, she actually goes to an Armenian Orthodox church when she does go, which she does from time to time. Below that, we also see the spread of Christianity from the Near East throughout the Roman Empire. So it's not just an Indian thing. It's not just a Central Asian thing. We see it actually all the way throughout the Roman Empire. And it says on the handout, it started as a persecuted minority. You might remember that we read documents where you could be investigated, you could be questioned, you could be tortured. But it didn't stay that way. In fact, it says on the handout, under the Emperor Constantine, it would become a state-sponsored majority. It would become a state-sponsored majority because it turns out this guy, Constantine, converted. And once he converted, other people did. We're going to finish this page today. We have 4 minutes. That's a lot of time. We have him convert, and now it became like okay to become a Christian. So it says on the handout that Constantine was real hands-on in his Christianity. And it says on the handout that the Emperor Constantine would call the Council of Nicaea. This is a city in modern-day Turkey. We don't think about Turkey as being a Christian nation, but in 325, like almost all of Turkey was Christian. And so they have this big meeting of all the Christian leaders all around the world, and they decide to meet here to answer all the questions and debates they had about Christianity. At the Council of Nicaea, they began to sort out doctrine, which means beliefs, religious beliefs. That's what the word doctrine means, religious beliefs. And there's one thing of Christianity that seemed to be the most confusing, and that's the idea of, like, how do you describe God? I have 3 minutes left. I'm going to use my 3. How many gods do Christians worship? But what do Christians do when they go to a church? Catholics, they do something with their hands. What do? They say in the name of... And how many names did you just say? But how many gods do you say Christians have? Wait, how are there 3, but then you're saying there's 1? What is the word for this Christian belief that there's 3 in 1?
Trinity.
The Trinity. And so one of the big issues of debate was the acceptance of, you'll write down, the Trinity. This was one of the things that they were debating because it is kind of confusing and weird. And not everyone agreed with the Trinity. In fact, people opposed it. The people who did not believe in the Trinity were a group called Arians. The opposition, called Arianism, said, yes, Jesus is Messiah, but he is not God. And so they have a big debate. And they open up the Bible and they say, well, let's hear, is he God or is he not? And they look at the Bible and then they vote. And they say, okay, all the leaders from Africa, all from Asia, let's vote. Is Jesus God in the Bible or not? And the vote we'll write down after the debating and all the discussion. This is the vote count. It was 316 to 2. 316 said, yeah, he's God. 2 guys, Arius and his friends, said, no, we still don't believe in it. And that is why it became official belief of Christianity. Tomorrow we're going to finish. I encourage you to look over your stuff, and we'll finish it tomorrow.